Well, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Markov, and I'm here to talk to you about managing your emotions in uncertain times. I'm going to share my screen. We've got an hour, and we've got an hour's worth of material. There's a lot of stuff to cover here. So I'm thrilled to be here. So this is a presentation by the Santa Barbara America's Job Centers of California. It's sponsored by the Workforce Development Board of Santa Barbara. And again, I'm Kathy Markov. I'm an HR and workforce professional, and I develop and teach courses to working professionals and people looking for work. So today we're going to talk about something really important. And again, this is managing emotions in uncertain times. We're really focusing in on how to use your emotional intelligence to manage your feelings when dealing with ambiguous situations. So that's kind of a mouthful, but let's get going and let's look at what we're talking about. So I wanted to start by telling you sort of a little story. So this is a little bit of a strange picture, but this comes from the guy who started this story. And this is about, well, this is what I want you to think about. There were these two caterpillars, and actually this story has a little moral. So I want you to think, what's the point of this story? So the story's about these two caterpillars, and they're going along in this kind of strange wagon, and they're looking up at the sky, and they see this beautiful butterfly going by. And so one caterpillar turns to the other and he says, you know, you'll never catch me up in one of those things. So, you know, I think this is kind of funny. And I've always asked people in live classes, like, so what's the answer to that? What's the moral to that story? And people come up with a lot of really interesting ideas about this. And I always tell another story. So sometimes people say, oh, you know, change is inevitable. You know, we never know what's coming up. Sometimes people ask, why are those wheels square? That has nothing to do with it. So they're distracted. You know, there's a lot of different things that we can say about the story. But there was this guy named John McEnroe, and he was a tennis star. He was a big time tennis star in the 70s and 80s. And he was really famous for like arguing every point, making a big scene on the court and bragging that he was the best. Anyway, one big tournament at the US Open, he lost, and he was arguing with the referees about losing the tournament. So anyway, after it was all over and he lost, all the reporters came with him with all those microphones and asked him, you know, John, what do you think about that? You lost, you know, you big bragging person, and you lost. And he said, well, that taught me a lesson, but I'm not really sure what it is. So this story of the caterpillars and the butterflies is a little bit like that, right? There's a lesson in telling this little story. And so I want, and honestly, in years of using this, no one's really gotten it right. So I want to show you what the lesson is of this, right? Here's the lesson, that it is risky to know the answer, right? And this is, I think, very important for the topic that we're talking about. If we're talking about managing your emotions in uncertain times, it is very risky to think that you have the answer to whatever it is. So when we are looking at developing our workforce skills and finding our value in the workplace, it means that we need to be innovative. We need to be able to work on teams. We need leadership. All of these things are things that I see on job seekers' resumes every day. But what does that really mean? Do they really, are they really able to do this? How about dealing with change? You know, all of these things require that we realize that there are lots of possibilities and lots of perspectives. And organizations that really succeed know how to harness all the different ideas that people bring to the table and learn from that to be the best at what they do. So When we think we know any answer, then our thinking becomes limited. So this is very important to think about too, because as I will describe, this is called managing emotions in uncertain times. Well, yeah, times have been uncertain. The last year and a half have been very rough, but times have always, are always, and will always be uncertain. So our ability to refrain from immediately knowing the answer to any situation and opening our minds to the possibility is really important. And this is a really important approach to change, which is actually inevitable. The ability to learn and grow. So it was the Buddha that said, remember, the only constant in life is changed. The future is unknowable to us. Even 2 years ago, obviously it was unknowable, but right now it's unknowable. So it's always been that way. It will always be that way. The challenge is to be ready at any time to lead, to be able to manage ourselves well, go with the flow, go with the change, and in order to really thrive in the world. So this quote I think is very interesting. It says, the world hates change, yet it's the only thing that has ever brought progress. So we know the future is unknowable, but we do know that change is going to happen. And you want to be able to manage yourself in a way that you can take advantage of that. So this is funny. I got this once in some kind of solicitation for, I think it was, I'm not sure where it came from, but it was some financial planner or whatever it was. And I guess Klaus Schwab from I'm not even a client of theirs, but they sent out this newsletter. And what they were talking about is sort of looking through the lens of history, kind of a timeline. And they were this was several years ago, talking about what they called the fourth industrial revolution. So, things started like in the 1700s, the time of Hamilton, right? They were talking about steam and water was really revolutionizing the way things were getting around. And then electricity in the late 1800s. And then in the mid 1900s, you had the revolution of automation. So you can see how things just build upon themselves and grow. And here we have now what they're calling the cyber physical systems. So this is important to think about too. Driverless cars, smart robotics, materials. I mean, just think about it. It was only in 2007 that the smartphone came into being with the first iPhone. And now we can't live without these things. Not only just personally, but professionally, business is conducted on our phones. It's unbelievable. You've made a lot of changes in your life, and I'm here to tell you, you're going to make more. And you may be young and thinking, well, my generation grew up with these things. Well, I can tell you when I was a kid, I had no idea that I would be conducting business over a little square piece of computer. And who knows what's coming in the future. So our ability to deal with these things is going to be very, very important. So what kind of changes are we going to see? What does it mean for us going forward? Think about the pandemic. I think there are some new opportunities. I always like to think of things as opportunities. So will we continue to work remotely? What's going to happen in terms of travel? I think business travel is really going to change. What about being in cities? What happens to all this commercial real estate? Will there be opportunities for new kinds of housing or places to gather? I don't know, but because everything is ambiguous. And guess what? Again, it's always been that way. We're just acutely aware of it now. So here's a person that I greatly admire, Gilda Radner. She was on the original cast of Saturday Night Live, super funny woman. And she said, life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. Delicious ambiguity. Now, let me tell you when she wrote that. She wrote that while she was diagnosed with, I think it was like stage 4 cancer. So she was facing the end of her life, and this is how she thought about it. Delicious ambiguity. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she was going to relish life all the way till the end. And this is a wonderful attitude that we need to think about, because we are in a very dynamic environment. And there's an acronym that I want to teach you. It's called VUCA. So our world is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, that we just don't know. There's not a lot of clarity. Now, the pandemic certainly brought that to the forefront, but again, it's always been there. And now you have the opportunity to develop your emotional intelligence in order to deal with this VUCA world. Because this kind of strategy is not a winning strategy, right? What if we just don't change at all and something magical just happens, right? Oh, things are just going to magically happen. No, that is not a successful strategy. What we really need to do is recognize that, yes, the world is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, but we need to demonstrate vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. And I said, you as a leader, you start by leading yourself. Now, these thoughts aren't my own. They come from a book called Leaders Make the Future, The 10 New Leadership Skills for an Uncertain World by Bob Jansen. So what he says is that because we're living in this VUCA world, that we really need to be able to deal with it, because he predicts that things are going to get worse. So your ability to manage your emotions in these uncertain times is really of vital importance to your well-being in the world. Your ability to get a job, keep a job, be able to change jobs, be able to pick yourself up if you lose a job. And it's not just in your work life, but also in your professional life. Things change. So being able to manage your emotions no matter what happens is a valuable skill to develop in order for you to live a happy and fulfilled life. So I'll read you this quote. This is from a very famous New York Times columnist named Thomas Friedman. He wrote a book. He was kind of a futurist. And so in the 90s, he wrote a book called The Earth is Flat. And he's written several books since. But what he does, he literally travels all over the world, interviewing people and really trying to give a bigger picture idea of what's happening. And this is what Thomas Friedman says. He says, we go to school for 12 or more years during our childhoods and early adulthood, and then we're done. But when the pace of change gets this fast, the only way to retain a lifelong working capacity is to engage in lifelong learning. Now, this is, I think, especially relevant to those of us that either work in workforce or are touching the workforce system. This past Saturday, I was a keynote speaker at an event for the San Luis Obispo Workforce Development Board and their provider of America's Job Center Services, Eckarts Connect. And it was really helping people develop a toolkit, a post-pandemic toolkit. And one of the things that is really in the forefront of any time we are looking for work, wanting to change jobs, when we're starting off in our career, when we're making a career change, or something happens, is to think about how can I invest in myself? I had the conversation with my son the other day, who's 20 years old. He's in the engineering school at San Diego State. And he was talking about something about how he doesn't have a lot of physical possessions. He's 20 years old, right? And that he has spent all of his money, quote unquote, it's a college fund that we've been putting in for years and years on, school. And I said, that is the very best thing that you can spend your money on. That is an investment in yourself that no one can ever, ever take away from you. And this is really important. Gone are the days when we think that we can just go to school and then our learning is done. Now, you may not end up back in formal education, but I was just talking with a young woman who I take exercise classes with, who just started her career, and she's with an insurance agent. And there are some opportunities for her to acquire some licenses with regard to the insurance industry. There's many different kinds of licenses. And I encouraged her. I said, even if you don't stay in insurance your entire life, just to go through the process of becoming certified and learning new skills and is so valuable. But I will say that we're going to be doing that throughout our whole life. For me personally, I have a business where I do management leadership training. I do this kind of thing for several workforce development boards. I even do training for the USAID, the federal government. I do some work internationally, and I support a lot of small businesses in the area in their professional development. In fact, when I get off this, I'm going to be doing another session for a group of HR directors. So I have a very busy life. I have a lot of education behind me. And when the pandemic hit, I was doing live training. I wasn't doing training over Zoom. Everything evaporated overnight. Within 2 days, my entire year of training had been canceled. So, the question is, what now? Well, I decided that I was going to go and get some more certifications and some more training. I've almost completed my 3rd certification course since the beginning of the pandemic. And through that, not only have I learned great skills, but I have greatly expanded my network and am doing some really remarkable, fun, and exciting virtual projects. And I can tell you that was not part of my business plan. In fact, I did not want to do virtual training. Now I have wonderful, wonderful experience with it, and I'm sold on it. So why do I tell you that story? Because we need to be lifelong learners. We need to embrace the concept of growing, developing, and unfolding in our life. And so what we need to really have in order to manage the emotions of these uncertain times is continue to have what Carol Dweck called a growth mindset. So there's a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Now, a fixed mindset is, well, I've been to school, I'm done, I have this job, it's going to be forever. Well, nothing is really forever. We see this with there are industries, coal, for example, where people are just hanging on. When the recession in 2009 happened, I had a lot of construction workers because unlike the recession we're in now that is COVID related, the one in 2009 was all about real estate. And I had construction workers coming in wanting to get jobs where? In construction. We were offering them training. They didn't want to do it because they had a fixed mindset. So what we really need to do is everyone needs to develop a growth mindset. Right? Nothing is written in stone. In fact, somewhere I have a stone that says nothing is written in stone. It's kind of a joke. But in reality, we as humans, in order to find our happiness and be fulfilled in our life, need to embrace continual growth and development by having that growth mindset. And in fact, employers highly value that as well. So let's look at a little bit of a theory of change, because what we're really talking about is things are changing all the time and we need to change with it. So this is what Lewin said. This is a very well-known model of change, but basically what he's saying is, we kind of get in our little comfort zone, in our little box, we feel very comfortable and something happens, a pandemic, oh my God, it unfreezes us, right? The question is, are we changing and getting back into a new and different pattern? Or do we seek to go back to the past? And this is not an easy process, but this is really what it is. So, the beginning of March 2020, we were like that square, all those squares put together, and then we were shut down. We unfreeze, everything is up in the air. We're beginning to start to change and to come back together, but I don't believe we'll go back to being a square anymore. We're going to refreeze in a triangle or something different. I mean, this is symbolic representation of that. But it is very important that we're able to make those changes if we want to thrive in the future. And, going back to that caterpillar butterfly thing, it's very interesting because there was a researcher, and what they did, they wanted to really track the process of metamorphosis. Remember that slide I showed you about the Buddha? So the caterpillar turns into a chrysalis, and over, a few weeks, a month, the chrysalis evolves into the butterfly, and the butterfly emerges. So these researchers wanted to see what happens during that process of metamorphosis. And so they had lots and lots of caterpillars, and they did sacrifice a few. They opened up the chrysalis, and somewhere right in the middle, it was just one big gooey mess. They couldn't see any parts of the caterpillar, and they couldn't see any parts of the butterfly. And the researchers wondered, is this even the same entity? Like maybe this isn't even the same thing. Maybe a caterpillar makes a chrysalis and then it dies. And in its process of decomposing, then something completely new is born. So what they did is they wanted to test this. So they took these caterpillars and they trained them, really. They trained them by having them listen to classical music. So every day they would play these caterpillars classical music to the point where the hairs on the caterpillar's back would all move in unison to this music. So they knew that these caterpillars, they were responding to certain pieces of music. So they let them go through their whole metamorphosis process, didn't disturb them, just let them go. And when the butterflies emerged on the other end, what do you think they did? Well, they played that classical music. And lo and behold, those butterflies started flapping their wings in the same pattern that the caterpillars had flapped their wings. So they knew that it was the same entity, just in a completely different form. But what is that? That tells us, yes, we as living creatures can change, but also in the middle of change, when we're unfreezing and changing, we're one big gooey mess. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. How do you manage your emotions when you're one big gooey mess? This is also from Thomas Friedman in his latest book called Thank You for Being Late. And what he's talking about is, he was talking about our human adaptability to technology. And what's interesting, you see, is the rate of change. Now, there's been lots of technological changes, and I love to tell the story of my grandmother who came across the plains of Oklahoma and New Mexico to Colorado in a covered wagon. And this was in the early 1900s. She passed away, and I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, and she had a cell phone. So imagine that you start off as a child, a toddler at 3 or 4 years old in a covered wagon, like Little House on the Prairie. And yet in your lifetime, you see men landing on the moon, TVs coming into your house, running water, electricity, all in your house, and you have a cell phone. So lots of changes. And I always thought that was remarkable. But I'm going to tell you that the people who are living now, we are experiencing even a faster rate of change in terms of how it impacts our life, right? People landing on the moon was quite remarkable. But all of these changes that this kind of technology brings are amazing. And what Thomas Friedman said is that our capacity to deal with the fast rate of change has been surpassed. So focusing a little bit on how to thrive in uncertain times is super important. What I call it, particularly in the workplace, is developing our professional maturity. So we need to develop our process observation skills. That's the ability to manage the current reality by seeing a bigger picture. This is why I do encourage, read Thomas Friedman, read things, get a bigger picture, not just sound bites that you get on social media or the TV. Spend some time trying to understand really the bigger picture. Be congruent with your values that you talk about and those that you enact. So who are you? What's your core? Make sure you're living your values. This is really important. Develop the ability to effectively communicate with others. So this is really key and important. Not only be able to get to mutual understanding with others, but to ask for and solicit help. Be tolerant of ambiguity, right? Be open to things when you don't know what's going to happen. Go with it. And learn insight about yourself in relationship to others. Now, we had a class a couple weeks ago about working types. That's a place to start. Know your limits, including not having all the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know, and then go figure it out. But one of the number one things we can do is to develop our emotional intelligence, or our EQ. That's what they call it. I know it's EI, but really the acronym is EQ, emotional intelligence, kind of like IQ, EQ. So let's talk about emotions a little bit. What are emotions? So emotions are a state of mind developed from your life experience, the attitudes that you approach life with, and the relationships you have with others. Emotions, actually, they emerge spontaneously and they're unconscious, usually with psychological impacts. So what does that mean? I want you right now just to think of a time when you were really stressed out. When you're stressed out, does your heart beat faster? Do your hands sweat a little bit? Do you have trouble thinking clearly? That's usually what happens to people, right? That's a physical impact of an emotion that you're feeling. Think of a time when you were really happy. Did you have more energy? Did you spontaneously smile? We had a big dinner party with a group of neighbors. We all got vaccinated, and it's been 2 weeks since everybody's been vaccinated. So we had it was a barbecue outside party, but we were so happy, right? So I had tons of energy and smiling, and my step was a little lighter. This is the physical impact, right? I felt happy. I couldn't contain myself. Think of a time when you're really sad. Just thinking about it, it likely made your body slump over a little bit, right? That's a spontaneous emotional response. And so this is why developing this emotional intelligence is really key, because it's spontaneous. It's usually unconscious. And there's a reason for that I'll get to in a little while. So let's look at this. There's been a lot said about emotional intelligence, and there are basically 7 universal emotions. So we want to really be able to develop our emotional vocabulary. Now, there are many different descriptions of these emotions underneath all of these, but let's take a look a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a series of slides, and I want to see if you can identify what emotion these are. So here's our first one. Okay, so look at the face, look at the body language, right? So what do you see here? You see here that this woman has her mouth is open. What does that indicate? You know what this indicates? She's surprised, right? If she had clenched her teeth, it would mean that she was angry. Now, this is all according to the theory of emotional intelligence. So these pictures that I chose represent what Dr. Paul Ekman's universal emotions that I just showed you. So when we look at this emotion is indicating surprise. We know that by the raised eyebrows, the eyes are very wide, the mouth is open. Now, what's very interesting is if we think about communication, a lot of times people think, oh, words are so important in communication. Actually, the research doesn't support that. What is more important than words, even more important with the tone, is our physiology. 57% of communication is done through our body language and our facial expressions. Now, this isn't a class about body language, but we are going to talk about facial expressions and what they indicate. Now, remember, I told you that our emotions are spontaneous, and we'll see in a little while that it is likely that you might have an expression like this before you realize you've done it. And then you want to hide your surprise, for example, right? So someone is planning to come to your house and you forgot and you open the door like this. Oh, you're surprised, right? No, oh yeah, hi, I'm so glad to see you. Quite a quickly try to switch into happiness. That is really important. So let's move on. Let's look at this one. What is this emotion? Okay. Well, this emotion is indicating sadness. How do we know? She has a drooping upper eyelids, right? She's looking down. She's losing focus in the eyes. When we're sad, we're not focusing as crystal clearly as we would in some other emotions. She's slightly pulling down her lips at her corners. You know, we talk about sadness being a frown. Well, it sort of is, right? Let's look at this one. Oh, look, you just want to smile. She's happy, right? What are the physical characteristics of this emotion? Look at her eyes. She's got like crow feet wrinkles in her eyes, like her eyes are involved in this, right? Her cheeks are pushed up. You can see movement from, you know, around the eyes and the big smile, okay? Why this is an open mouth, kind of like surprise, but really with this, instead of surprise, has wide open eyes. This has these, you know, crinkly eyes. Here's one, I think you'll get this one pretty quick, right? Oh, this guy is mad. So we look at eyebrows down and together, right? They're going down and together. He's glaring with his eyes. His lips are narrowed. So when we see anger, the whole face sort of becomes vertical lines. It's kind of funny if you think about the emojis you have in your phone. One for anger probably has like a straight line for a mouth, straight eyes, right? That indicates you're mad. We know these things. The starting point for emotional intelligence is to be able to identify them. Now here's one, right? This is kind of an interesting one. What do you think this is? This is disgust, right? So we know this, the nose wrinkling up, the upper lip is raised, the bottom lip is loose, the eyebrows are pulled down, like disgust. Think about, when have you demonstrated this facial expression? So here's another one, right? Ah, this is fear, right? This is the emotion that Ellen is trying to provoke when that clown pops out of a box or behind a tree or whatever it is, right? It's not surprise that they're doing, they're not surprised. When you go on the Ellen show, you know this clown is going to pop up, but what is being expressed here is fear, right? And on that show, we laugh about it, but truly, this picture was taken inside a camera set up in a haunted house. So notice how the guy in blue, he's really getting ready to sacrifice his friend to the monster. He wants to escape. So it's kicking in that fight or flight response. So what do we see here? Look at the eyebrows are raised. They're pulled, you know, together. The upper eyelids are raised, the mouth is open, the lips are stretched horizontal back in fear. Now think about it. Think about the emojis on your phone. They indicate these kind of things too. So here's one that actually, first time I thought about this, really had me scratch my head. The official name of this one is called contempt. But remember, I told you, and you can look this up on the internet, under each of these 7 universal emotions, there's a lot of different ways to name them. But contempt is the feeling that a person or thing is beneath consideration, is worthless, or deserves scorn. So think about that. Have you ever felt that way for someone? Maybe at work? Yeah, I had a boss that actually I felt contempt towards them. I, at the time, couldn't really put my finger on it, like what it was. But I'm sure I look like this a lot with this person. I actually ended up leaving that job. But I hear a lot of times when I do coaching and I work with teams, intact teams, I hear someone said, well, You know, how do they know I don't like them? I never even talked to them. You don't have to say a word. If this is the emotion that's being communicated, people know you find them contemptuous, right? Undeserving, deserving of scorn, actually. So what are the physical characteristics of contempt? Now look at the lip corners are tightened and raised on only one side of the face. So this idea of contempt kind of has a sideways, really, right? So here is one more. I'm going to give you one more, and here we go. What do you think of that? Now, this is a tough one, okay? This is a tough one. This is actually a picture of Mark Zuckerberg, if you hadn't figured that out. Now, this is really a spoiler because, in fact, he's not exhibiting any emotion. This is a neutral or a poker face. So what I want to do is the reason why we did this is that emotionally intelligent people are able to recognize the emotions of others and react appropriately to those emotions. Right? They have a finely tuned emotional vocabulary. And guess what? We're going to talk about it because it's a spontaneous reaction. So it's almost always there. And it gives you really the upper hand to be able to decide how to react in any situation, actually how to respond. And that's the whole point of this class, right? Respond to whatever happens to you by managing your emotions, right? And when we're that way, people want to be around us. They feel comfortable with us. We have the opportunity to lead in that situation. I want to tell you a little story about the power of this kind of thing. So I can't remember the year of this. This was, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. There's an airline. It's called Cathay Pacific. I believe it's out of Hong Kong, but I could be wrong. Anyway, it's a very nice airline, very well rated. They're particularly known for their friendly staff. Well, it's an important airline in Asia and Pacific region, you know, major flights in and out of major airports in China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, all these places where so much is manufactured, and international global organization. And there was a union of the flight attendants. And they were very unhappy with the negotiation for increased raises, better benefits. And the people that work for the company understood the important role they played in the economies of all of the countries that it served, including the United States, but particularly the countries in Asia that were really focusing on developing their economies. So, you know, if they're unhappy with the negotiation, they do have the opportunity to strike, but they didn't want to do it because they understood the impact of that. And they were worried. They were worried they'd all lose their jobs. So instead of stopping working, they decided that they would go on what they called a smile strike, meaning that they would go to work and they would not smile at anybody. They would do their job. They would bring you your peanuts and your Coca-Cola on the plane. They would welcome you onto the plane, pointing out where you should sit, that kind of thing, but with absolutely, well, a Mark Zuckerberg kind of a face. Do you know how long that strike lasted? Less than a day, right? That was very effective. Immediately, the company owners and everybody else decided to give in and to give them what they wanted. So this is just a real life story of how important this facial expression is and the emotions that we display. So this is a little chart kind of looking at this. Our behavior affects our feelings. Our feelings can influence our performance, and our performance can be enhanced through positive behaviors, which again are impacted by our feelings, right? Which influences our performance. So it's kind of like a little cycle, but this is important to consider for a variety of reasons. You know, one of my classes that I've taught here for the Workforce Development Board, I said something to the effect of, you don't want to scare your employer, right? Meaning that you want to be able to manage your attitude so that you have a positive attitude. You're not going in there and begging for a job or being really, presenting yourself in a way that is just not comfortable to be with, right? So that's one aspect. But also, if you are in a job and you're realizing, like I did, that my emotions I'm displaying are not positive emotions, you have to stop and think about yourself. Be self-aware enough to say, hey, I'll bet you my performance is not so great, and it's time for me to pick up and move on, right? Embrace change. This is the kind of world that we live in, and we can take advantage of that and find a place for us to be happy. So let's look at this. This is how we experience the world through our five senses, our sense of sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. And of course, the touch, sight, hearing are all very tangible, quote unquote, very real things. But even though we're not always aware of smell and taste, they do have a big impact, even in the professional world, right? So let's look at how the brain works. The stimuli are our five senses, okay? Sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. They all come together to create a feeling. Unfortunately, that's a different word, right? Something that we kinetic, not the touch, the feeling of touch, but an emotion inside of us, okay? So the stimulus comes in, and look, the filter is after the emotion. This is really important. What did I say about emotions? Emotions are spontaneous. So something comes in, we react, and then we filter it and interpret it and behave. So there are a couple things about that. One, we want to train ourselves to hold back a little bit on our gut reaction, to learn to respond rather than to react. That's easier said than done. But also to know that most people don't work on their emotional intelligence. So most people don't have a filter. So in that case, this gives you the opportunity to be able to determine what are people's emotions and what is the best way to respond to it. So, this is where the kind of the magic happens. And this is why, we've always been taught, I know I have, to, if we're getting angry or if we have strong emotions, stop, count to 10, right? Or think before we act. Because naturally we're wired, this is actually a protection mechanism to respond emotionally before we actually guts into the part of a brain where we filter it out and think about it and have a behavior that's more productive. So we always have this choice between responding and reacting. And you know where I'm going. We want to learn to respond, to be deliberate, to be aware, to be solution-based, to find a resolution. Right? Our feelings and needs are in the middle of these two things. But when we react, we're impulsive. We lose our filter. We're unaware of how we're impacting other people, right? And this is where we can get into trouble, particularly when we're working or we're looking for work, right? We want to be sure that we're in a good mindset where we're able to respond. So when we react, you're giving away, oops, what happened there? Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, let me see if I can pull this up again. That has never happened before. You should be seeing a picture of the beautiful courthouse here in Santa Barbara. I will say my poor computer has probably been very much overworked today. But let's get us back where we were before. Let's make sure we can bring this up. I'm sorry about that, but enjoy the courthouse. So I was just sharing with you a quote, and I love this quote. This quote is there. Can you see that again? Can I maybe get some feedback here?
Yes.
You can see it. Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry about that. It happens sometimes, unfortunately. But here we go. So what I think is really great, I love this quote. It says that when you react, you're giving away your power. When you respond, you're staying in control of yourself. And this is really important. So when we are professionals, we're learning how to be more in control of ourselves. So what I wish for you is that we can stop reacting and start responding to the situation. Again, I've said this, it is much easier said than done, but that's why we need to learn how to increase our emotional intelligence. So let's go into a little more definition of what is this emotional intelligence that we're talking about. Okay, there was a book, and this book is called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And this is how I said it was EQ is another way of looking at it. Emotional intelligence is your ability to identify and understand your emotions and those of others, and use this understanding to guide your behavior and manage your relationships. So in tests of important skills, it was found that the EQ is more important than almost anything else. And your ability to use your EQ was more important than time management, decision-making, and communication. So your EQ is the foundation of a host of critical skills. It impacts most everything you say and do every day. Your emotional intelligence is really critical to success, and it accounts for 58% of performance in all jobs. So it's not just certain jobs, but all jobs benefit from increased emotional intelligence. It is the single biggest predictor of performance in the workplace and the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. So no matter whether you measure high or low, the good news is that you can improve it. So if you are low in emotional intelligence, and in this book, you can take a little quiz and find out, this is actually something that you can catch up and surpass anybody. So your cognitive intelligence or your IQ, right? That's not flexible. Unless maybe there's a traumatic brain injury, but your IQ is really set at birth. So your intelligence is your ability to learn, and it's the same at 50 as it was at 15. But on the other hand, your EQ or your emotional intelligence, it's a flexible skill that can be learned. So some people are maybe more naturally emotionally intelligent than others, but you can develop your EQ to a high level. So let's talk about the benefits of EQ. So a couple of things that it does for us. It makes better relationships, right? We understand how other people tick, and we can develop positive and harmonious working relationships. It makes us more effective performers, as I've mentioned that before. So it is a key to personal and professional success. It gives us tools to become more self-aware and allows us to be in better self-control. And it helps us to control our negative emotions like anger and sadness, or to funnel them into positive pursuits. You know, anger can be one of those things that if it's put into the right energy, it can move you into a whole nother area, help you, motivate you to take the next step, but you've got to use it for its positive impact. And it helps you develop your leadership capacity, right? Leaders with high level of emotional intelligence have an advantage over their less well-equipped counterparts. So your EQ can help you develop empathy and understanding about other people. And it's really a critical ability to inspire, influence, motivate, and persuade when you're in a leadership role. So having EQ is key. But there's a little bit of caveat on that. This here was the title of an article in Inc. magazine. It said EQ scores drop like a rock for those holding director titles and above, with CEOs having the lowest EQ score in the workplace. So in my research, this has been found out that EQ scores climb with titles from the bottom of the corporate ladder up towards middle management. As we progress through middle management, we tend to increase our emotional intelligence skills. But past that, something gets lost in the translation. And they change dramatically as you move beyond middle management. And there have been books about this. There are certain leaps that we make in our career. And when you go from middle management into managing a division or up in the C-suite, we find that the lowest scores are in the C-suite. So when you get promoted and enter an environment, a different environment, it tends to erode our emotional intelligence. So this is why it's very important to be able to develop this now. And in my experience of coaching executives and doing 360 feedback on people, one of the hardest things the higher up you go is that people are not willing to give you feedback. So just keeping that in mind, and the sooner you are able to develop your emotional intelligence, the better. So the 4 components of emotional intelligence are your personal competency and your social competency. And they are divided into what you see and what you do. So let's look at these a little bit. Self-awareness. So how can you become more self-aware? Know what and who pushes your buttons and how to respond to that. Seek and be open to feedback about your behavior and be aware of how your feelings impact your behavior, right? You can learn new responses to things, right? I have a family member that is just constantly negative and complaining. And no matter what I say, they just continue to complain. Then they begin to argue with me about why am I so positive? Why can't you be negative? And I just decided I can't change this person, so I'm just going to agree. So they say something totally off the wall and negative, oh, you're right. It is so this or so. I just agree with them. And while, I don't hold those views, it's harmless enough. It's not like they're someone making a big decision at work, but it is a better response than for me to have this reaction that's really negative, right? So know who pushes your buttons and come up with ways to respond that are more appropriate for the given situation, and be more aware of your own feelings and get feedback. So there's a real return on investment in self-awareness. It helps you develop compassion for others. This little exercise I told you about, by agreeing, I've realized how sad this person is. So it's an elderly family member. They're just in an unhappy place. And so they say these unhappy things. So now I've decided that my goal is to try to create some happiness in their life. So you really can develop compassion for others. You understand your own preferences in a different way. And by understanding that, you see what's possible. It gives you this ability to respond versus reacting, and it puts you again in the driver's seat. So becoming self-aware, it's increasing your power. And also, people who have high self-awareness are 83% more likely to be a top performer, but just 2% of the bottom performers are highly self-aware. So I always love to show things from The Office. Remember Michael Scott, he really needs to increase his emotional intelligence. This is why he was stuck in his job. So being more emotionally intelligent can help us when we get stuck. It's important to begin to see yourself the way others see you. You want to be mindful, even if your mind is full. I love that, right? But this is self-awareness. You're busy right now. And so, be aware of that. Be mindful, even when your mind is full. Let's talk a little bit about self-management. So self-management, all of these things, and we can have classes on all of these, how to get organize, how to stay focused, how to set goals, how to reach goals, right? But this is about your self-management. And this is very important, coupled with self-awareness. Now let's move down onto the social area, social awareness. We talk a lot about this with kids, maybe not so much with adults, but it is important. In more and more increasingly, I'm being hired to develop group norms for people. So this is getting at this idea of making social awareness, not just saying, oh, well, everybody can be, just be nice to each other. No, let's make it explicit. Let's be conscious about it, just like we were when we were kids. This is very important so that everybody gets on the same page. And the ultimate really here, the foundation of developing your social awareness is to seek to understand and then be understood. This was by the famous author Stephen Covey. So social awareness is your ability to accurately pick up on other people's emotions and understand what's really going on with them. So remember, people have a spontaneous emotional reaction, then it goes through the filter. So that first little flash on someone's face, there's probably something there, right? There's probably something deeper than what they're saying or how they're filtering, how they're going to respond. So you may need to develop your ability to perceive what other people are thinking and feeling, even if you don't feel that same way. Right? I tend to be very enthusiastic. I get excited about things, but not everybody feels that way. So it's important to be aware of that because it's easy to get caught up in your own emotions and to forget to consider that other people may not be feeling the same way. So being socially aware ensures that you stay focused and absorb critical information. So listening, observing, they're the most important elements of social awareness. To listen well and observe what's going on around us. I call it a third eye skill, right? You're you in the situation, you're being authentic, but you're also able to pick up clues on how other people are. You might not, if you know me, I like to talk, I like to tell stories, and I have had to develop the ability to be really socially aware that sometimes, it's inappropriate or I'm going on too long, and that kind of thing is really important. So relationship management, right? It's all about leadership and influence. So you may not be the formal leader, but everyone in an organization has the opportunity to be able to influence others. And this has a lot to do with relationship management. So the goal here is that you're socially aware enough that you can navigate the way forward. So I want to make some distinction between three terms. The first one is sympathy. Sympathy is that someone tells you something's going on. You say, oh, I've been through that before. And you sit and you cry, yeah, the boss is terrible. I hate the boss. Oh, this is a terrible place to work. There's no movement there. No one's going anywhere. Yeah, you guys are connecting in this very negative way, sympathy. But the next level up is empathy. So empathy is that you listen. Yes, this person has a problem. Now, maybe you don't have the same problem that they do, but you are empathizing with them. You're understanding where they are, right? So that's a step forward. But the most important thing, and I love to talk about this when we're talking about emotional intelligence, is to have compassion. Compassion is a leadership quality. And again, leadership, not formal leadership, but you understand the emotions that people are feeling. You can say, oh, that's terrible. That really sucks. I'm sorry you're going through this. And have you ever thought about it this way? That's compassion. So compassion motivates people to go out of their way to help the physical, mental, or emotional pains of another and themselves. So this is ultimately what we're really trying to do with increasing our emotional intelligence in order to manage whatever comes along. So here's some things you can do. Acknowledge other people's feelings. When you care, show it. Watch your emotions like a hawk, right? Know that it's going to take a while to get to your filter. So be aware of your own emotions. And this is one of my favorite, right? I know my emotional intelligence goes up significantly when I'm well rested, right? Get your sleep. We talk a lot about that. When I was growing up, we all wanted to know, how did, people survive on 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night? Because we want to do everything, but that is not healthy. It's not good. It's not how we demonstrate emotional intelligence. Stop listening to your negative self-talk, right? We all have this little voice inside our head that's talking to us. Is it negative or positive? Work on making a positive narrative for yourself. And this is really the final slide. I love this. This is by Henry Ford. Some of the things I've talked about, it takes a level of consciousness that is deliberate, right? But with the intention of helping you become more fulfilled and play that influential role in motivating and inspiring others in your life. So Henry Ford said, when you think you can or think you can't, you're right. So we've been talking about managing your emotions in uncertain times. And again, guess what? Times are always uncertain. And by learning to develop our emotional intelligence and managing our emotions, it sets us up for success no matter what happens. And that really is the point. So with that, I am going to end it. I'm actually going to turn off the recording, but what I'd like to do is invite anyone who's live on the Zoom. You can turn on your video, and we can do any kind of question and answer. So with that, I'll thank those that are watching this on YouTube. I'm going to turn the recording off, and I will